Good morning. Good morning. So I'm going to just do a quick introduction. My name is Michelle Fitzpatrick. I am here with John Starling and Sarah Starling, and we are going to be talking about 1031 exchanges, in particular, a focus on reverse exchanges and improvement exchanges. It is 12 o'clock, and we are going to get started probably around 12:02, somewhere around there. A couple housekeeping items. This is a presentation where you can certainly turn on your camera, and we will be happy to see you. If you want to ask a question, you can simply unmute yourself and ask that question, or you can type it in the chat. I will be monitoring the chat as well.
Did you say Shirley's in?
If
Sherry.
you are just
Sherry.
sitting back, please keep your microphone on mute so we can hear the presentation properly. In saying all that, we are recording the session. So please note that if you decide that you want to turn your recording on or ask a question, you will be recorded and it will be going out to everybody who's registered for this webinar today. So you are consenting to being recorded. If you don't feel comfortable, you can either sign off and you'll get the recording after this. So that's my housekeeping items. And I think that brings us to just about time. So let's get started. My name is Michelle Fitzpatrick. I am with Northern 1031 Exchange. As I said, I'm here with my associates, John Starling and Sarah Starling, and we are going to be presenting reverse exchanges. John, Sarah, you want to give yourself a little introduction?
This is my dad, not my husband.
True.
That's all I got.
So
yeah, nice to meet you guys. I've been working in the exchange space with John and Michelle. I've been doing it for about 15 years, and just happy to be tagging along here this afternoon.
yeah, we're going to be talking about reverse exchanges and improvement exchanges and how those work. And I've been involved with exchanges and serving as qualified intermediary for over almost 25 years now, not quite, but almost 25 years. And we've done thousands and thousands of exchanges and saved millions and millions of tax dollars for people to be able to use to increase and build their wealth faster using 1031 as a wealth building tool. It also stimulates the economy, of course, and that's why it is and has been an active part of the tax code for over 100 years now and continues to stimulate the economy. It allows people to sell property without having to pay tax on the profits of that investment property, as long as they are buying replacement property. And of course, if they want to pay no tax, then they would have to buy property of equal or greater value and use all the proceeds from the sale of the relinquished property towards the purchase of the replacement. So now I think Michelle's going to probably lead us off to start with, and Michelle and Sarah are going to go over the basics of the 1031 process in a kind of a short step-by-step procedure, and then we'll get into the more intricate reverse and improvement exchange processes.
Yeah, thanks, John. So anytime we do a webinar, as most of you know, we do a monthly webinar series. We're always talking about 1031 exchange, but we always focus on one particular portion of 1031 exchange each month. So each month we have a new topic within the 1031 exchange tax code. So we have a variety of people on our webinars each month. We have investors, we have exchangers, we have realtors, brokers, attorneys, CPAs, really anybody that's involved in the 1031 exchange. So this is going to be beneficial for all of you. So today we're going to kind of go through the code. We're going to give you the basics on forward exchanges, what capital gains taxes look like, the timeframes and the rules regarding the timeframes, the rules regarding the identification period. And then again, John's going to jump in and really dive into what an improvement exchange is and what a reverse exchange is. So that's kind of our topic today. We're going to probably end around 12:45, and then we're going to leave 15 minutes for conversations, for questions. But like I said, if you have something, type it in the chat, and I will be reviewing those questions as we go. So Sarah, do you want to take the first slide?
Sure. So this is the basic of all 1031 relates back to this definition here. And this is actually in the IRS code, and this is what the 1031 is all about. So no gain or loss shall be recognized on the exchange of real property held for productive use in a trade or business or for investment if such property is exchanged solely for real property of like kind, which is to be held either for productive use in a trade or business or for investment. And you see, we've got that real in green because that's real estate that you can exchange only real property for other real property. Personal property was cut out of the code during the first Trump administration.
That is right. So I think there's a misconception, I think, about what capital gains tax is. A lot of people will talk about, you know what, I think it's going to be easier if I just pay my capital gains taxes when I sell my property, and I'm going to go ahead and pay 20% federal capital gains tax. It's less expensive than my normal income tax rate, which unfortunately is not the case. And I'm giving you an example of what Massachusetts tax looks like, but so it varies. The state tax will vary state to state, but this is an example of Massachusetts. So the federal capital gains tax rate is anywhere from 15 or 20%. Now, depending on what your income bracket is, most people that are in Massachusetts selling a property in Massachusetts will typically fall in that 20% range just because of the value of that property. The next federal capital gains tax is 3.8%. It's called the net investment income tax, or NIIT tax. It's a Medicare surcharge that gets tacked on when you have a capital gain. So that's 3.8%. And the last tax on the federal side is the recapture of depreciation. So every year the IRS allows you to depreciate your property. For residential, 27 and a half years. For commercial, it's 39 years. So you get this nice bonus every year. But when you go to sell the property, the IRS recaptures all that depreciation that you took over the life of owning that property at 25%. So if you've depreciated $100,000, they're recapturing $25,000 of that back upon your sale. So that becomes a fairly substantial amount right there. And then you've got your state tax. Massachusetts state tax is 5%. And if you have, for every dollar over $1 million that is earned, so that's both your income and the sale of your property, for any dollar over $1 million that's earned is going to be taxed at an additional 4%. So as you can see, it adds up pretty quickly. So most times we tell people that you should be gauging around 30 to 35% of your gain will be taxed.
Michelle, it's interesting that so many people feel like that the only tax that they have to pay when they sell real estate is the capital gains tax,
Yeah.
and they're only going to have to pay 15%.
Yeah.
When they understand that it's going to add up to as much as 30 or 35%, they really start paying a lot of attention.
It's right. And we're a medium tax state. I mean, Massachusetts is kind of high tax, but there are others. You're in California, you're paying the state tax bumps up to what, 13% or so?
13
You're
and
in
a half.
Texas. Yeah, you're in Texas. It's not Texas, excuse me. You're in New York. You're in 9.5%, 10%. So it's yeah, it's significant. It's significant, especially in these higher tax states. So it's nice that 1031 exchange will defer both federal and state taxes. Sarah, if you want to take this one.
Sure. So this is a chart that discusses the role as the qualified intermediary, right? So the taxpayers at the top there, taxpayer, and the qualified intermediary is actually acting as the intermediary. Um, so when you go to sell your property to a buyer, you're just doing a direct deed. We're actually not going on title to that property. So we just end up on the settlement statement when you sell, and then the funds go directly to the qualified intermediary at the time of the closing, and they're held in a qualified escrow account until you're ready to purchase the replacement property, and those funds they flow to the closing firm, and then you purchase the property, and the deed is it's direct deeded right into the taxpayer, and that's the whole closed loop system there. And we're just holding the funds in the middle. And there's a timeline there. You've got 45 days from the closing to identify a replacement property and 180 days to close on it.
Yeah, and those are I want to just kind of jump in and talk about two things. It is a requirement that the qualified intermediary is a neutral third party. So, the attorney cannot act as qualified intermediary. The realtor cannot act as qualified intermediary. So that's kind of why we step in. We are a neutral third party, and we will take constructive receipt of those funds. So you cannot, as an exchanger, cannot take constructive receipt of the funds. That will disqualify your exchange. And being a bank-owned qualified intermediary, I feel like we give people a little bit of a peace of mind of the security of the funds when we hold those. In the 180 days and 45 days, as Sarah mentioned, these are hard calendar days. So there's really very little chance of these ever being extended. The only time the 45 days or the 180 days will have an extension is if there is a federally declared disaster. The wildfires in California, those, if you were in an affected area, you would have gotten an extension. Things like Hurricane Katrina. I'm dating myself to way back because I can't think of a more recent hurricane, but Helene. Yeah. You guys are in North Carolina, so you know all the hurricanes. We don't have to know them up in Boston all that well. So those are extension. Those are when you can extend those. The IRS will allow those extensions. But otherwise, 45 calendar days you need to identify, and 180 calendar days. So if your 180th day falls on a Saturday, you know that you need to close on your property on the 179th day, the day before. So that's really important. Those calendar days, those are very strict. And from our standpoint, we timestamp everything. So your 45-day identification period all comes through DocuSign. It is all timestamped. Same with your 180 days. Everything we do is via DocuSign, so we ensure that you are following these guidelines. The identification rules, this is another one, and I'm not going to get too deep into this, but the IRS is not making this very easy for you. They don't want you to go ahead and try to identify 100 properties and you can willy-nilly choose which one you want. There's very strict guidelines on how you identify. Now, there are 3 rules, and you have to choose one of the rules of identification. The 3 property rule is great when it's used when you're selling one property and buying 1, possibly 2 properties. It simply says you can identify 3 properties. It doesn't matter what the value is. You can buy 1, you can buy 2, you can buy all 3 of them. The 200% rule allows you to identify an unlimited number of properties. So this is somebody that's looking to diversify. They want to buy they want to sell 1 property and buy 5. Well, the rule of 3 is not going to work in that case. So the 200% rule says that you can identify an unlimited number of properties. The aggregate value of all the properties you've identified cannot exceed 200% of the value of the property you've sold. So you sell $1 million property, you can identify 10 $200,000 properties, which will come out to $2 million. So that's where your limit is. And the last rule is very rarely used, but it's there just in case for specific purposes. This says that you can identify an unlimited number of properties for an unlimited value. So you can exceed both of those two previous rules, but whatever you identify, you have to purchase 95% of. So it's very restrictive from that standpoint because you have to be sure that you're going to pretty much buy everything. And if anybody has questions about those ID rules, feel free to jump in and ask those questions. Here are the exceptions to 1031 exchange. As Sarah stated earlier when we were talking about the exchange code, she basically said that the 1031 exchange is for investment properties and properties that are held for business use. So that's where those are the properties you can exchange. These are the ones that you cannot exchange. So you cannot exchange your personal residence. There's a primary residence tax exemption for people selling primary residence, so you're not going to use a 1031 exchange for that. Vacation homes, or I should say second homes that are used primarily for personal use. So if it's your second home, you do not rent it, you spend every summer and every weekend up there, those actually do not have any tax benefits at all. So you're not able to use that as part of an exchange. We have done vacation rental exchanges, and we have done webinars on vacation rentals. So if you want more information on vacation rentals, we'll talk more about that at a later time, or you can send an email and we'll discuss that. You cannot exchange anything that's held for a quick flip. So the flippers, the contractors that are selling things for a quick resale, that is not exchangeable property. Stocks, bonds, or notes. Other securities of evidence of indebtedness, or interest. So there's no like holding back a mortgage. Those are not exchangeable. Interests in a partnership. Again, this is something that we'll talk about at a later time. So if you're trying to get out of a partnership, it's a very, very difficult exchange. So in general, we say interests in a partnership you cannot exchange, but we do have guidelines and a way to do a very complex exchange. In certificates of trust or beneficial interest. So those are all not exchangeable property. Sarah, you can take this one if you'd like.
So you've got this is called types, formats, and variations. So you've got your two-party trade. You don't need a QI for that. You're just swapping. We've had a few of those. They actually still used a qualified intermediary because they didn't feel comfortable handling the process, and our fee is kind of nominal compared to the worry that it creates. So that's the original 1031 is where you're swapping, you're selling to a buyer and the buyer's selling to you. So and then we're talking about the delayed exchange with a qualified intermediary. That's the standard 1031 where you sell and then you buy. And you can have multiple sales and acquisitions. So I call that, like, you could sell two and buy one. You call that a twofer, which is kind of corny, but whatever. Reverse exchange, we're going to go over that. You buy and then you sell. It's actually a parking arrangement, because you're still doing a forward exchange, and John is going to go into that detail, as well as improvement exchanges, personal property exchanges. Now, excluded from 1031 treatment, of course, you can't exchange your personal property. That falls under Code 121, and that you get an automatic exemption of $250 or $500, depending on if you're married or you're single.
That's on your primary residence.
Yes.
Right.
Excuse me. That's personal property. Apologize. So personal property, you weren't allowed to exchange that anymore.
Cars, boats, airplanes.
Yes.
Artwork used to be exchangeable, not anymore.
That's right. Businesses too. So this is one that we like to debunk. It's like kind property myth. We like to debunk this because a lot of people will call and ask, I'm selling a single family house. Do I have to buy another single family? Do I have to buy residential? And that is simply a myth. Like kind simply means investment property, real estate, for investment property real estate. So it can be any grade, it doesn't matter. So if you're selling a residential single family, you can buy a commercial property, a farm, industrial. If you're selling a commercial property, you can buy condos, residential condos. It really doesn't matter what the grade of the property is. Vacant land is exchangeable property. We've done exchangeable property. We've done exchanges for boat slips down in Miami that are deeded. We've done them for parking spots in Boston that are deeded. So really anything that is considered investment property, deeded investment real estate.
If you're selling property that has been depreciated over the course of time, that's improved, in other words, improved property, and you're buying replacement property that's land only, you could have some tax from the unrecaptured depreciation. But that would be in a very limited case.
Yeah. So John, now we're going to start talking about reverse exchanges. So why don't you explain what a reverse exchange is? And then we're going to start talking about the title holder, the EAT, and the parking arrangement that we put in place.
What's an EAT, Michelle?
So the EAT is the exchange accommodation title holder, and that is the parking arrangement on how we, as the qualified intermediary and our partners, will take title to the replacement property is part of a reverse exchange.
So a reverse is just kind of like a forward exchange, is like you sell one and then you buy a replacement, right? That's a forward exchange. And a reverse, you would buy one and then sell the property you intend to relinquish. So you're kind of putting the cart before the horse. And the IRS says that's fine. But remember, if you purchase a replacement property and you already own it before you sell your relinquished property, and you put that property in your name that you're buying as your replacement, then when you sell your relinquished, you can't buy property you already own, so you don't have an exchange. You don't have a good exchange. And that's where in 2000 the year 2000, the IRS came out with a procedure that they called a safe harbor procedure, and they issued a revenue procedure called 2000-37, which set up these parking arrangements so that you could actually buy the replacement property first and park it with an entity that you don't own. So you supply the money, and then the property is purchased, but it can't be purchased in your name, so it has to be put in a special purpose LLC that we form, or that we have an associated firm form, to hold that property while you are marketing the relinquished property. And that's a reverse, kind of in a nutshell.
And I think one of the things that is kind of the biggest consideration whenever doing a reverse exchange is that you have to have the means to be able to purchase the replacement property without having yet sold the relinquished property. So you need to have the cash, or an ability to get the cash, or a mortgage, or some sort of form to purchase that.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So let's see about that next slide. Okay, go on to the next slide, Michelle. All right, so parking the replacement property. So you can park either property. You can park the relinquished property, or you can park the replacement. So let's talk about parking the replacement first and the considerations involved in that. Exchange needs to have the means, the exchanger needs to have the means to purchase the replacement property without having sold the relinquished property. There you go. So not for the faint of heart, because you're going to have to put up the money to buy the replacement property. Either you put it up from your own cash or savings, or you put up a down payment and you borrow the balance from a lending institution. lenders will, of course, need to understand that they're making a loan to a LLC that is not owned by you, but that is managed by you and will be yours at some point as soon as you sell your relinquished property. So we have to give the lender a full and clear understanding of the way the reverse 1031 exchange works. And most lenders that are commercial lenders understand this process and will make the loan without any problem. If you're trying to get a long-term 30-year Fannie Mae fixed rate loan, you will have a problem because, first of all, they don't allow lending to LLCs. And secondly, you can't make a loan to an entity that the borrower doesn't own in most cases. So these are the issues about parking the replacement property. And if you'll go back, I tell you what, Michelle, let me share my screen. And
we should probably talk a little bit about that special purpose entity. So as you said, we create a special purpose entity, an LLC. The exchanger is the manager of that LLC, whereas the EAT, the exchange accommodation title holder, is the member. So they're technically the owner. And at the end of the exchange period, once the relinquished property is sold, we can do one of two things. We can either transfer the title from the LLC back to the exchanger, completing the exchange, or we can assign the LLC, the LLC that's holding title to the property, assign that to the exchanger, in avoiding the transfer tax.
Absolutely. So,
John, how you doing with the?
Let me see if I can get this slide presentation working properly, and then I will share my screen here with you. Let me see if I can share this screen. Okay. Now, do you see that?
Yep.
Okay, so if we go back over to this parking replacement property, let's talk about it in a step-by-step procedure. So starting out, you've got a contract for the purchase of the replacement property. You find a property that you want. And why do people want to buy something before they sell their relinquished property? Generally,
are you asking me? Because I can answer for you if you need.
Answer that one, Michelle.
So in a hot market, I think people, if they find their dream property and they are very confident that their relinquished property, the one that they're going to sell, is going to sell soon, they want to be able to go in, purchase that replacement property without any contingencies, or without any delays. So they can go in, grab that replacement property they want, knowing that the relinquished property is going to sell.
Michelle, that reminds me of that old adage, the fear of loss is a greater motivator than the opportunity for gain. You've heard that before?
I haven't. You're like Confucius right now. That's
So the issue here then becomes you're going to sell your property. It'll probably sell fairly quickly because you're going to put it on the market at a fair market value, and the market is good and there's lots of buyers and not many sellers. And so you're concerned not about selling your relinquished property, but you're concerned about will you be able to find that replacement property within that 45-day window that you have in order to identify the replacement property. You start looking and you see one all of a sudden that just fits the bill. So that's when you call Michelle or me or Sarah and you say, hey, I found a property. I need to buy it. Can I do a reverse exchange? And the answer, of course, is yes. You can go ahead and contract to purchase that property. And you see number one in my little matrix here, my little schematic. Number one, there's a contract for the purchase of the replacement property. That would be between the taxpayer or the exchanger, that's you, the person that doesn't want to pay the tax when they sell their relinquished property, and the replacement property seller. So then that contract is assigned to the EAT, And the EAT number 2 receives the money in order to purchase the replacement property from the seller. So number 2, either the EAT receives the money from the taxpayer because the taxpayer or the exchanger has enough money to buy the replacement property without borrowing funds, and the exchanger lends the money to the EAT, or the exchanger doesn't have quite enough money, and so he uses part of his money and part of a lender's money or an institutional lender's money to buy the replacement property, and that's given to the EAT, and the EAT gives the money to the seller, and then number 3, the seller deeds the replacement property to the EAT. So now the EAT owns the replacement property, has used the exchanger's money or a combination of the exchanger's money and a lender's money to purchase that property and take it off the market, and now it's parked in an EAT LLC while the taxpayer exchanger is trying to sell the property that he intends to relinquish to a buyer. So now the EAT issues, number 4, a lease to the taxpayer on the property that he has just purchased so that the taxpayer or the exchanger can enjoy the benefits of ownership of that replacement property. Maybe the taxpayer wants to rent the property out and they can start immediately renting it and getting income, basically subleasing it, or they can be working on it to fix it up to have it ready for rental occupancy as soon as possible. So the exchanger then is marketing his replacement property, and the next step, of course, is the exchanger receives a contract from a potential buyer, and that contract is executed between the exchanger and the buyer, and so now he's got the property he intends to relinquish under contract. Number 6 is the assignment of that contract from the buyer to the qualified intermediary. So number 6 comes down so that the money can flow through to the qualified intermediary. And then number 7, direct transfer of the relinquished property from the exchanger to the buyer of the relinquished property, and the buyer pays us, the qualified intermediary. And then you have the qualified intermediary holding the buyer's funds. Okay, so that's number 8. Number 9, there's a contract entered into between the exchanger and the EAT for the EAT to sell the exchanger the replacement property. And now that we have the money, we enter the exchanger enters into that contract with the EAT, and then number 10, the exchanger assigns the contract to the qualified intermediary. So then the intermediary has the right to pay the money to the EAT so that the EAT can then transfer the property under number 12 directly to the exchanger. So the property can be transferred, as Michelle said earlier, either by transfer of the membership interest in the LLC or by deed from the LLC to the exchanger. And that can happen in several different ways based on how the exchanger owns the relinquished property. So that's number 12. The last step, of course, is to get the money from the EAT back to the exchanger that lent the money in the first place, or back to the lender and the exchanger who may have made a combination loan to the EAT to buy that replacement property at the beginning. So that completes our cycle. Is that perfectly clear?
John, I know that the graph that we have up looks confusing, and it's not something that all of our exchanges. This is kind of what's happening in the background, right? Like we're doing all the paperwork for it, and this is a very, very complex process. But we are handling this all for the exchanger.
Exactly. And that's of course, you can see that because it is so complex, that's the reason a reverse exchange is quite a bit more expensive than a forward exchange is.
Right, right. And I think people have a little bit of sticker shock in the difference between what the reverse looks like and what the forward looks like. So,
Yeah, and if you have a $100,000 tax bill, um, that, and the only way you can make the 1031 exchange happen is in a reverse, you're still saving a ton of tax money that way, even with the
absolutely,
higher fee.
absolutely.
And we look after all of the details. All of this back maneuvering is behind the scenes, as you said, Michelle.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that you did a very good job explaining the details of what goes on with a reverse exchange. But I think it's important to note too that people often ask if they do a reverse exchange, will they get paid back the money that they put up? So if they purchase a replacement property using cash as part of their reverse, and then they receive the cash when they sell their relinquished, that money will go back to them.
Exactly. And that would be like in step number 13, the EAT would be holding the money that he received from the qualified intermediary. The qualified intermediary received it from the relinquished property buyer. So the buyer pays the qualified intermediary pays the EAT, and the EAT then returns the money to the taxpayer. And of course, it could be that the taxpayer is buying a replacement property that is much more, and so he had to borrow money and he won't get paid back all of the money, but he'll get paid back all of the money that came from the buyer to buy his relinquished property, and therefore he'll be reimbursed. So if there was a lender involved, then the exchanger gets reimbursed what he put up, and then the lender has to be reimbursed for the amount that they put up, as far as, as long as the exchange funds hold up from the EAT. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the next slide, Michelle.
Do you want me to take the slideshow?
What is this? Yes, you take the slideshow.
So we're going to talk next to and we're going to do this quick. We don't have a diagram for this. We're going to literally just talk about parking a relinquished property. So sometimes when you're parking a replacement property, the problem with parking the replacement property is trying to finance it. So if you do not have the means to purchase the replacement property in all cash and you're struggling to find a lender that's going to understand that parking arrangement, it may be easier to park the relinquished property, meaning you're gonna sell the property, essentially your relinquished property, to the EAT, and then you're gonna purchase your replacement property as you normally would. So John, if you want to take them through this process.
Yeah, so the parking of the relinquished property just means that you're going to complete your exchange when you buy your replacement property. So if you're going to complete your exchange when you buy your replacement property, then you have to convey the relinquished property out of your name so that you can buy the replacement property in your name. This is done primarily for people that want to establish long-term financing on the replacement property at the purchase of the replacement property. So then they can go to a lender in a conventional fashion and tell the lender that they're buying a replacement property in an exchange, but they're going to be selling their relinquished property to an exchange accommodation title holder just prior to the purchase of the replacement property. So then the lender makes maybe a 30-year Fannie Mae Freddie Mac loan on the replacement property to the exchanger, and the exchanger then, of course, can continue on and make his monthly payments on that, and he won't have to worry about financing of the replacement property. The negative there is just that we have to, of course, continue to try to market and sell the relinquished property. It's now in the name of the EAT, so the listing agent on the listing side trying to market and sell the relinquished property has to show that the ownership is in the name of the EAT. And now the EAT, of course, is is not owned by the taxpayer, but is controlled by the taxpayer as the manager of the EAT. So the taxpayer will, or the exchanger will enter into a listing agreement with the realtor and we'll sign the contract. It'll just be, instead of the actual exchanger selling the property, it'll be an LLC that the exchanger has control over through management of that property. And at that point, we have several other issues to discuss, and that is that if the relinquished property already has a mortgage on it, if it's not fully 100% owned by, if there is a mortgage against it, let's put it this way, if there's debt owed on the relinquished property, then when we transfer that property to the EAT, an arrangement needs to be made with the bank that's holding that note to allow that transfer, because if it's not, then that lender could accelerate the payment of the note and call the loan so that the exchanger would have to pay off that old mortgage. We wouldn't want that to happen during the process of selling the property. So we have to make arrangements prior to the exchange process in order to make sure that they will agree to the assumption of that loan. Secondly, we have to make sure that we have the property marketed properly and priced right, so that we know that it will sell by the end of the 180th day from the purchase of the replacement property. So the problem is that if we don't sell that relinquished property by the 180th day, then we're going to end up with a failed exchange. And if they want to tax protect that relinquished property that didn't sell, they'll have to buy another replacement property. So that's kind of like the downside of the reverse with the relinquished property part, because there's no opportunity for what we call a white knight option. Now let's go back and talk about the replacement property parking procedure, because if we get into parking the replacement property and we reach the end of our 180th day and we haven't sold the relinquished property, then we can perform a white knight operation, option, which would then allow the continuation of the marketing. And once that property to be relinquished has been sold, then we can still tax protect it even if it's after the 180th day. That white knight procedure, though, is not simple. It's a complex process also that requires you to sell the relinquished property to a related party or a related entity. So let's take, for instance, Sarah, if your brother or your sister or your mother or father wanted to step in and give you a down payment on that relinquished property on your 170th day, and then you give them a note and a deed of trust back for the balance of the purchase price, then the property could be transferred from the EAT directly to the related party. And then the related party would be able to continue to try to market the property and sell it. And eventually when they did, you would of course get paid for the mortgage that you had given on the property, and you would be able to be replenished for, with the cash that came from that sale. And the related party would be reimbursed for the 10% down payment that they made to you. So then it would complete the exchange if it had to go beyond 180 days. So Go ahead.
John, I think it's important to note that there's pros and cons to whether you park the replacement or the relinquished property. And that's something that we would discuss as we are onboarding somebody to do a reverse exchange. And that's something that's a conversation that we would have and make sure that, our exchanger is choosing the right path. But with any reverse exchange, you have 180 days to sell your relinquished property. And you have, after taking title to the replacement property, and you have an option. You still have that 45-day identification period. So if you have multiple properties that you can market to sell, you can buy one property and then you can show that you might sell one of three properties. So that's an option. There are people that are out there that have portfolios, and one may sell quicker than the next, and they can certainly use that if they've identified that within the first 45 days.
Correct. So you have 45 days to identify which relinquished property you're going to sell, which property that you already own that you're going to sell. This is in a reverse. And you have 180 days to actually close on that property that you intend to sell. So,
That's right. That's right. So, and I think, we've had so much good information on the reverse exchange, and it is so detailed to really understand what a reverse exchange is. But I want to spend the next 5 minutes talking about an improvement exchange, because that's it's a really important process that we use for people that are selling a higher net worth property, selling $1 million property, let's say, and now they want to buy a $700,000 property, but use the proceeds, $300,000, to improve that property. And that's an improvement exchange. So can we kind of go through the steps of what that improvement exchange might look like? Because we're going to use
absolutely.
a
And
parking arrangement for this as well.
yeah, and the improvement exchange uses the parking process similar to the reverse exchange, but it's not really a reverse because you're selling your relinquished property and now you're either buying a lot to build on or you're buying a property that you need to rehab,
Or put an ADU on.
put an ADU on, and you can park that property that you're buying while you are improving it, thereby allowing the value of it to be increased before you actually take title to it. So the parking procedure for an improvement exchange works like this. Number one, you enter into a contract with the buyer of the relinquished property and into the exchange agreement with the QI. At the closing, the settlement agent directs the funds to the QI. The QI then holds those funds. A contract for the replacement property is entered into. The QI opens an LLC as an EAT. The property is transferred to the EAT. The QI uses part of the proceeds to buy the property. The QI is holding additional proceeds to be used towards the improvement of the property. And for the next 180 days, those funds can be spent for construction. Now remember, if you're going to do that rehab, you've got to move forward quickly because you only have 180 days to spend the remainder of the money that you have left over in your exchange account before you have to take ownership of the replacement property. If you spend it all, and in your example, Michelle, you were buying a $700,000 property. You had $1 million in cash in the exchange account. You used the 700 to close on the purchase. Then you start using the 300,000 to remodel the kitchen and the baths and repaint the property and so forth. So then, if you do that all within that 180-day period, you've had a very complex exchange come together, and there of course are lots of advantages to buying a property and rehabbing it, and then the built-in equity there could be substantially more than the actual cash that you got in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to reiterate what you said, so from the time that you sell your relinquished property, you have 180 days total to not only have the EAT take title to the replacement property, but you have to do all the improvements within 180
Cool.
days. So
Yeah,
it's
to get to your target.
yeah, it's a tight time frame for those really, really big ground up renovation, ground up builds, it tends to be a little bit easier if you have everything lined up and ready to go, where you don't have to pull too many permits and go through the hassle of rezoning or any time-consuming paperwork. But
And
the
I think,
improvements,
Sarah, you were making a good point there. You,
You don't
if,
have to be complete. A lot of people think, well, I need to finish the build and get my CO before we can transfer the title. And if you just have $200,000 to spend, you just need to get $200,000 worth of improvements in, and then we can transfer the title, the deed from the EAT LLC to the client, and that'll work, and that helps them, because they just have the 6 months, like you were saying, Michelle.
yeah, and if they still have more repairs to make, they can make those repairs after they've already had the property transferred to them from the EAT. So if they were going to do a $500,000 rehab, they might not get all 500,000 spent by the end of the 180th day. That's no problem, as long as they get all the money spent that we were holding.
I mean, we already talked about these considerations: tight time frame, the EAT's going to be taking title to the unimproved property, and then same financing issues if you're using a lender as part of an improvement, which is the same that we talked about when we were using the EAT for the reverse exchange. So with all of that, I think we're through all of our slides. So if you, sorry, Sarah, I have to get a nice picture of you, a nice headshot of you. You'll outshine.
I need to get one.
You'll outshine John and I. So our information is up here. And with saying all of that, does anybody have any questions about the reverse process, about the improvement process, about even the forward exchange process? We have a few minutes left, so we usually save some time to the end. And normally we have a very live crowd with a lot of questions, but today it doesn't seem that way. Jeff, yes, I will send you the slideshow. Happy to do that.
And click on your camera and your microphone and feel free to just ask a question.
Yeah, if you're in an exchange, if you're thinking about an exchange, if you have a client that's thinking about an exchange, this is a great way for you to educate your clients. And if you're a realtor, get those listings, encouraging people to get their property on the market.
For me?
Sure.
I have a question. If you have excess funds after you've completed the reverse exchange and still have funds left over from the sale of the relinquished property, can you still do a forward exchange?
Absolutely. And that forward exchange, your time clock starts again. So if you have extra funds left over because you bought down in value, you can go ahead at that point and identify another replacement property to use up the remaining funds.
And you don't need to have a separate exchange agreement. You can use the QEAA as that
Yes.
exchange agreement. Okay.
Thanks for the question. That was a good question.
I have another question from Elizabeth. How does the QI determine the fees? We do have a set fee schedule. So our forward exchanges are on a set fee, and our reverses are on a set fee as well. The only time that we have additional fees is usually when we have to do a complex exchange. Where we're doing like a partnership division or redemption, something like that. But our reverse fees and our forward fees are set. Any other questions that you may have? Again, you can feel free to turn on your camera and ask those questions. You can unmute yourself. We're going to hang on for another few minutes. We've got about 5 more minutes left. So if anybody has any other questions, John, Sarah, were there any other considerations that we needed to, you know what, I'll go back to this slide and talk a little bit about QI due diligence.
Yeah.
as we're sitting here, just kind of waiting for some questions, but QI due diligence, it is important. And we say this all the time, not all QIs are created equally, nor are realtors or attorneys. So it's really important to make sure that you know who you're working with and who your qualified intermediary is. And these are some of the questions that you should ask as you're shopping for a qualified intermediary. The safety and the security of your funds. How are your proceeds held? What's the what are the requirements for deposits when withdrawals? Do they have fraud protection in place? Is the QI audited by an independent third party? And is the QI a member of the Federation of Exchange Accommodators? We have all of these. So we have fraud protection. We're audited. We are members of the Federation of Exchange Accommodators for the last 10 years, and we're a bank-owned qualified intermediary. So that's really where we stand out.
Lots of extra protections for your money because we have all of these banking regulations on top of our our Federation of Exchange Accommodator bylaws and requirements.
That's right. So I'm going to put our information back up again, and we're going to wrap up. I don't see any more questions. So I appreciate everybody's time today. John and Sarah, thank you so much for the wealth of information that you are. It is always appreciated, and glad to see you on our webinars. And thank you all for attending today. The recordings will come out later on this afternoon. So if you have any questions, our information's up there and you can reach out.